Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Roundabout Books. My name is Julie, and as the event manager of Roundabout, it is an honor to welcome you to the bookshop as a place to share the discussion of ideas and knowledge within our community. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that our bookstore resides on the ancestral, unceded lands of the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. In our neighboring area are also the unceded lands of the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians and the tribes of the Grand Ronde. We encourage everyone to learn more about the land you occupy and the story of its peoples. So we return together tonight for our fifth of 6 conversations about the circumstances surrounding poverty in Central Oregon. Tonight, our focus is devoted to understanding the gaps in affordable housing. Please remember that our panelists are volunteering their time tonight. Your questions are very welcome, but our speakers deserve our attention and respect in all interactions. Our format is set up so that the first half of our time, each panelist will introduce themselves and their work. This will be followed by a guided conversation led by our facilitator. The second half of our time will be open for your questions. Our next community conversation is August 10th. If you have not registered, please do so on Eventbrite. We welcome everyone. It will be focusing on taking everything we've learned in this series and moving forward. Before that one, next Thursday though, we have an author out of Vancouver, Washington that's going to come down and talk with us, and her book speaks directly to a lot of the things we've been talking about in this series. It's called The Practice of Belonging, 6 Lessons from Vibrant Communities to Combat Loneliness, Foster Diversity, and Cultivate Caring Relationships. As a ticketed event, it's $5 or purchase of the book. You can do that on Eventbrite, or you can buy books from us tonight. Finally, I would like to introduce our partner on this project, Donna Burklow, the Family Kitchen Program Director. She's been involved with Family Kitchen for about 15 years, including 10 as a staff member. She works with over 400 incredible volunteers to assemble 14,000 hot, nutritious meals for the Central Oregon community each month. Donna organized our speakers tonight, and I'm turning it over to her to introduce them.
As she said, I work at Family Kitchen, and we are a community free meal program downtown Bend. And before I do my spiel that I have done at each of these, I wanted to set the stage a little bit with a story. One of our panelists is missing this evening, so it's kind of appropriate that I can tell a story about his location as well. John Modise was going to be here from Shepherd's House Ministries, and they are running the 2nd Street Shelter. Amy will have all that we need to know about that. But I thought I'd tell a little story about how difficult it is, how needed it is, all of the above, to have housing for a wide variety of people. And the gentleman I want to speak about tonight is a gentleman who had been coming to Family Kitchen as long as I've been there, so 15 years or more, for every meal. You probably saw him on the streets downtown and thought he was houseless. He was not. He was living in a house, but it was terrible conditions. He was being taken advantage of. We all knew it. We tried to do different things over time to help this situation. Couldn't do much of anything until it became obvious that he was falling into Alzheimer's. Then we could kind of try and get some stuff done. So sneaky us, we got him into the medical clinic by saying that's where his lunch was. We did a few other things in order to get him diagnosed and get him in on the system so that we could then start to get him into some stable, safer housing. As luck would have it, strange that this would be luck in this case, because every other conversation we'll have about this won't be luck, but the house that he was in was being sold out from under him. Normally we don't like to hear that. In this case it was good, because that also kind of prompted some action. It still took umpteen calls to Adult Protective Services. It took getting him diagnosed. It took getting him over to, finally, the 2nd Street Shelter, low barrier shelter, where we could know we would have eyes on him regularly, that he would have a meal regularly, that the medical van was going to be there regularly, before we could really get him fully into the system. And he is now living in an assisted living memory care unit, safe and sound, but that is a long time in the process. So I think setting the stage of, this is even with somebody elderly, frail, sick, being taken advantage of, all of the above, it is hard to make all this happen. So I say that to set the stage a bit, and then I do want to say that we're looking forward to having a conversation where we can offer up these realities that we see that are both statistical realities and anecdotal. It's about these humans that we all interact with on a daily basis. And we're looking forward to knowing what questions you have, so please start forming them. That's the idea here tonight, is to be able to address your questions. As service providers in this field, we're often only invited to the table when the conversation is a bit contentious, like maybe a city council meeting or something like that, where a decision's gonna be made, and we've all been involved in those, and they're very uncomfortable for us, so know that we're probably a little on edge in some ways when we face a bunch of people about some topics that are a little difficult, so know that. Know that the panelists and facilitators are here on their own time. Sometimes they're going to talk about their own personal perspectives, and sometimes they're going to be talking about their work perspectives. We want them to be allowed to flow in between those, and so know that that will be happening. Any combative, divisive speech and action will not be tolerated. We will just shut the event down. I don't anticipate that, but I want to make sure that's understood because nobody needs that. It's not going to be helpful. We did put out this guide to civility that is used with the City Club, and also at many other meetings. We use them for the Homeless Leadership Coalition meetings as well. So these are out and about if you wanted to refer to those, but that's the guide that we use for conversations. And yeah, so next thing up is the two-person. I know we're looking forward to being in conversation together. Get those questions ready, and I am going to introduce Roger, which involves pulling up some information that is not about my brother who's in the hospital. This other thing. Here we go. So Roger, whom I know from the Fuse Board, which is the permanent supportive housing program here in Bend, and it's frequent user system engagement. If anybody ever wondered what Fuse stood for, if you knew about them. So he's a board member there. He has 30 years of experience in affordable housing. 16 years of it was working for the Home Forward, which is the Housing Authority of Portland, as the Director of Public Housing. He's currently the General Manager of Epic Property Management for the past 7 years. And so Roger is certainly well informed and well experienced to be leading us tonight, and I hand the mic to you.
All right, thank you. I'm not used to using a mic, so I used to like yelling. So if I start yelling, tell me to put the mic down, and we'll be along fun. So I love this venue. How many of you have been here for other conversations? Okay, almost everybody. So we have a lot to live up to. Right. You know what? Usually, whenever I start meetings like this, I always say we really want to be more like a Johnny Carson show than a Jerry Springer show. And I don't know if anybody has ever been listening to the podcast or watching Smartless, but that's what this feels like right now. Anybody Smartless? It's a really great podcast. So conversations are fun. They're usually done, over happy hour or business events and small talk, those kinds of things. And usually it starts with getting to know each other first, right? And so we want to start off by getting to know you. So I'm going to ask a few questions. You don't have to, all you have to do is raise your hands. We're not going to ask you to, be on the spot. But the first question is a question that I think is so typical of Central Oregon. It almost feels like every time I'm in a conversation with someone, this question comes up. And that is, how long have you lived in Central Oregon? Right? It's almost like currency. It's almost like giving street credit the longer you lived here. So with the raise of hands, how many people were born here? Okay, all right, nice. How many people have lived here 30 years or more? Nice, all right, 20 to 30 years. Okay, 10 to 20, and under 10. Okay, good. All right, second question. How many of you either work or volunteer for some type of a service agency or work directly with the houseless population? All right, good. All right. Not quite preaching to the choir. It'd be nice to have other people in here that kind of have a good experience. And then the last question is, how many of you personally know someone that is experiencing or is at the risk of experiencing or has experienced houselessness? All right, so you actually have a face. As we talk about this, it's really important to have a face because, you know, the social media paints the face of homelessness very different than what it really is. And it's hard to really understand it until you've experienced it. So as a facilitator, what I hope to do is keep the conversation going. You know, whenever you're in a conversation with people you don't know, there's awkward silences. And I hope to fill those with questions. So first priority is your questions, right? We want questions from you, but if you go silent, I have some questions kind of listed that I'll pull out. The second thing is my own experience. So as I said, I have 30 years, it's hard to say that, 30 years of affordable housing experience. My experience is very different from the folks on the couch. My experience is what happens whenever a person that's houseless actually gets a house. And what do they go through to stabilize, to be able to be successful in that house? And what does it take to be a housing provider to have the environment for them to be successful? And also, just there's a big spectrum of housing that is kind of under the affordable housing. And in those 30 years, I have experience with most of those. So from temporary housing to what we call special needs housing, to permanent supportive housing, to low barrier, to housing first, to public housing program, which is very different than how most people define public housing, and then to affordable housing. And if you have questions about any of that type of housing, I'd be glad to share, you know, my experience with you. But I think the focus today will be more on kind of what's front and center in Central Oregon right now, and that is shelters and you know, people living off the grid and coming into town, and what are we doing about it, and who's doing things about it. And the best part about this is, you know, we have folks on this couch that are doing stuff. They're genuine, they're smart, and they have hearts that you know, get them through the hard times of working with you know, really tough situations sometimes. So instead of me introducing them, I'm going to turn it over first to Amy to introduce and kind of talk about her experience real quick.
Good evening. Am I on? Let's see. Good evening. My name is Amy Bryant Fraley, and I work for the city of Bend. My family moved here in 1973. I was only 3 years old, not to date myself. But I went to R.A. Jewell Elementary, I went to Cascade, I graduated from Bend High, and then drove out of town as fast as I could, saying I'm never coming back, and you have to come visit me in Seattle, because I had the audacity to be a Husky. So after a couple of years after graduation in Seattle, and having a couple of children, my husband and I looked at each other and realized we could not afford to live in Seattle, and that we desperately needed my mom, not my dad to help, but we really needed my mom. And so, my dad is very helpful, that's not fair. But we moved back to Bend because we wanted to raise our kids here, and found a house that we bought in 1998 up on Aubrey Butte in the Old West Hills for $175,000. And we have stayed in that house, that little house, and raised our family. And what we realized is if we would come here now, we wouldn't have been able to raise our kids here. We would have had to rely on our parents for a lot of help to even get into the market. And so every day we are grateful that we had that opportunity and that our kids had a place to come home and call home, and we got to raise them here with love. I've been with the city for 2 years. My specialty is working with shelter. And so when we talk about shelter in the city of Bend, I can be here and tell you there's 529 shelter beds as of last week in the city. The city is responsible for directly supporting Nikki's amazing program, as well as the Navigation Center, which is on 2nd Street, the Rainbow Motel, which is the Franklin Avenue shelter, and then also the Stepping Stone shelter, which is a turnkey property in the former Bend Value Inn. We also provide the framework for 5 safe parking sites around town, and that is what I can tell you about tonight, and a little about Bend in 1973. So thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to answering your questions. And I brought paper, so if anybody wants paper to take away, I've got some. Thank you.
Well, I'm Nikki Merritt. I'm the Executive Director for Central Oregon Villages. I was born and raised here, so I've seen a lot of, I think you've lived here longer than I have, so a couple years after you've been here longer than I have. But I was born and raised here, so I've seen a lot of change that's happened in the community. And I've also struggled with my own affordable housing in Central Oregon. As a single parent, a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, I was fortunate to get to purchase a short sale house. And that's the only way that I was able to be a homeowner and raise my kids in the same house. So I have some experience in that, but I've worked with foster children, at-risk kids, a lot of mentoring programs and social services since 2011. So I've seen the impact, especially in children living in foster care. One of the highest reasons for children being removed is inadequate housing. And so a lot of families are being torn apart because they can't find adequate housing. And so watching the impacts on those children it's very impactful. There was a study out a few years ago saying that 70% of the unhoused population have aged out of foster care. And so I think as I look at our community and see, some people on the streets that are becoming evidence and notorious kind of on the streets, I try to look at them through the lens of, this is probably an adult that didn't have resources as a child. And so I first try to check myself there, and then, try to move on with, what is the situation that's, currently happening. But trying to put it in perspective, like, this person that I'm seeing is probably not someone like myself that had a stable home with parents, that had consistent meals, that was able to go to school, consistently and focus on school because they had meals and they knew where they were going at night. They had consistent parents without, those types of issues. So I always try to set myself there first before trying to jump into, I think you should do this or that, or, why are these patterns repeating? It's not always easy. But I work, the Central Oregon Villages provides temporary outdoor shelter for those unhoused in our community. So we're providing a unit that has electricity in it, but no plumbing. So we have a separate a trailer for showers and toilets. And so it's not easy living for them, but it is much better and much safer for them to be there than to be in tents where they can't feel safe at night, or where they can't leave their belongings. And so it's not a long-term solution, but it's a stepping stone into something different. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I have 3 beautiful children, 2 naughty dogs.
The goat, tell them about the goat.
We won't get to the goat tonight. They're also naughty.
All right. Conversation begins.
I have a question. For villages, what would be some of the sites? Is like China Head one of your sites?
No, so we have what we call a micro village.
Do you mind repeating the question?
What?
Well, I mean,
Here, I can be a wondering
thank you.
question. Here, you want to
I'm trying to understand what villages are.
Yeah.
And China Head came to mind, and I asked her, is that one of the places she oversees? Can she explain more
Yeah.
about villages?
Definitely. So Chinatown is an unsanctioned camping location. What we are doing is a managed village. So the United Methodist Church, we call it a microsite. So we have 2 shelters there and a little trailer that's kind of used as a kitchen. And so we have 2 men that are in that site on the parking lot of the church. We provide the units for them to live in, a porta potty for them. The church allows us to go in 3 times a week to let those men have showers. They both work full time. You know, one guy on that site, he makes $21 an hour. He works full time. He's had the same job for 6 years. He can't find an apartment. He can't find anything in town to rent. So he's been with us almost a year. But they're managed sites. We have another site at Desert Stream Church, completely fenced. We were able to lease 2 acres from the church, so we fenced it. We're still kind of in process of developing that site. Right now we have 8 units on site, and we're building out 20 more, or 20 in total, sorry. And so there, we have a shower trailer, porta potties, a kitchen trailer, and we provide 1 meal a day. But they do case management every week with our case manager, working on long-term housing. What barriers are keeping them from having long-term housing and addressing those.
I just think it might be helpful to talk a little bit more about the difference between managed and unmanaged. Just because if we've got names of sites and things that it's gonna get mushy if we don't talk a little bit more about them.
Yeah, it's an easy question, but probably hard to answer. Is there a census at any point in time of how many houseless are in the local community or the county?
So according to the PIC count, which is done, it's nationwide, it's point in time, sorry. The point in time count is in January. It's a single, they say it's a single night, but it's actually a week during which they count individuals who are experiencing houselessness through a variety of mechanisms. And in the city of Bend, based on the last PIC count, which was in January, there is 1,012 individuals experiencing houselessness in our area. PIDs are notorious to be an undercount because it is just that snapshot, and so we are well aware that is.
So this was addressed really well in our last conversation, which is up on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
That kind of, I mean,
About the undercount.
About how
Yes.
counts are off
Yes.
because of one night in a
One
shelter,
night.
one night on a friend's couch, one night you're not
Well, and it
counted.
typically doesn't capture those folks that might be couch surfing because they may not be getting services, and especially doesn't count those kids who might be in that position. I did bring just a snapshot of the point in time if anybody wants it. One of the unique situations in Central Oregon is that most of those folks that are houseless are unsheltered, and that's not true across the country. It's 73% of people that are experiencing houselessness in Bend are unsheltered, and so they are staying in places that are not meant to be inhabited.
Can you say that percentage again? I couldn't hear.
That 73% of folks that are unsheltered in our area, or excuse me, that are houseless are unsheltered houseless, so they're not in shelter. If we have 529 shelter beds, then we know that we're not serving 1,012 people. We opened the Rainbow Motel, which we call the Franklin Avenue Shelter, in May, and we were stunned at the number of families that came in and accessed services, families that we didn't know even were in the community, that we didn't have a pulse on at all. And so what we thought would be just a couple of set-aside units, because we looked at this number of children and we know who was coming into the navigation center, and all of a sudden there were people that needed shelter right then with minor children. So I think we've got 12 families at the Franklin Avenue shelter right now with minor children. So, yeah, 1,012, really an undercount.
Other questions?
Well, did you wanna,
Sure. Regarding managed and unmanaged, so the programs that Nikki is talking about, one is safe parking, which is at the church downtown, and the other is the temporary outdoor shelter, which is on Bear Creek in 27. Those are shelters that are funded by the city or another organization. Nikki's is funded by the city. There is insurance, there are program guidelines, there are best practices, there are operators there providing service to move people from houselessness into more permanent housing. When we talk about the unsupported, and I can't think of a good way to categorize, people aren't camping, it's survival sheltering. They are trying to survive in places like Huddle or off the Parkway or out on China Hat. Those are not camps that have that kind of structure and support. Those are people who are desperate for service, but we haven't found very often the right service for them. And so they're stuck at this intersection of poverty and houselessness.
You had a question?
I'm gonna run a microphone to you.
I don't know if you'll need one for me, but.
Okay.
Okay, in a previous session, it was mentioned that 80 churches, there were some 80 churches in Bend and 2 offered their grounds for managed camps. I assume one of them is the Bear Creek 27th, is that?
That's not considered safe parking, because we're leasing the property and we'll have 20 units there. So safe parking is 6 units or less, without the full structure that this larger village.
Okay, but
So that's in addition.
is the place at 27th and Bear Creek affiliated with the church?
We're leasing the
Or
property
leasing land
from
from the church?
yes.
So that's one of the 2 then, that I'm
No,
thinking.
no.
Oh, it's not?
No, that's what
It's not?
Yeah, so safe parking is the 2 that you're thinking about,
I'm
and they
sorry.
have to be six or less.
And it's actually, there are 4 churches now
Really?
that are participating.
That was my next question, so it's been amplified.
So 4.
Okay, that's good. Seems to me that that's what, churches are kind of in the business of doing, or should be, helping out. So how is that going?
We are actively trying to reach out and develop those relationships.
Sure.
The city does not fund safe parking. We will fund some case management services, but it does take a financial commitment
Uh-huh,
from the organization.
uh-huh.
And so I can't speak to why it isn't more prevalent in the community. I know that the churches that are doing it are very pleased. I know that the city is kind of the backstop if there is a challenge, and I have been contacted one time ever about a complaint.
Mhm.
And so, and people love to call the city and complain, so that is a testament to the diligent work
Sure.
that those communities are doing and the people that are managing
Mm-hmm.
those programs. So
Okay.
we'd love to have more, we'd love to talk to people. We've got a couple in the hopper, but they're not with communities that big.
I see.
So if you have a church, I would love to talk with them.
Or any parking lot.
Or any parking lot,
Let's
anywhere.
not put it all on there. Parking lots everywhere.
I just have a question, can you name those 4 churches that are doing safe parking?
I can, we typically don't throw it out there that much, just because there's some pushback. Unitarian Church, Antioch, Nativity Lutheran is kind of the grandparent of all of them. They've got the multiple sites there, and then the United Methodist, which I call one church, is that? Ben Church, okay. So those are the 4.
This is sort of a question in defense of the churches. I think that there have been other churches in the core of the city who have offered part of their land for various things, safe parking and more like what's at Desert Stream. And then the neighbors have jumped all over it and have prevented it from happening. So when somebody says the churches should take care of it, I would just like to suggest that we all need to take care of it.
Very true. And there has been, no community or neighborhood has ever said, for the most part, we're super excited to have this. There are a lot of barriers. I think that the city now has a track record of this program being a successful mechanism to move people from houselessness into housing. And so hopefully we can revisit with communities of faith and anybody with a parking lot and say this is doable and it's a small piece that we can all do.
So, sorry, I wanted to ask one really quick, and I think it might be more you as a property manager.
Sure.
So with the title of this being gaps in affordable housing, I kind of want to talk about what it means for someone who is gainfully employed. I work for myself outside of here. I might make too much for low income housing, but I make just barely enough, and I still to pay my rent in Redmond, and I still visit food banks because that is one of the only ways I can save money is to go to church food banks. So that is something I think a lot of people in Bend maybe aren't seeing is I'm one disaster away from losing my house.
Yes. And there's, so Epic Property Management is a property management company that's actually owned by the local housing authority, Housing Works. And so our focus is on affordable housing 100%. We manage all of their properties. It's 45 properties, 1,300 units, all over Central Oregon. And we also have another owner that we partnered with just because we fell in love with their mission. It was called Rich Meadows in Redmond. You heard of Rich Meadows in Redmond? So amazing. But what we see is our waiting list for our properties are years long. And our waiting list, so we open up our waiting list on a website, and people can go online and register online. And that website gets over 3,000 hits a week. Yeah, and so if the count says there's 1,000 people that are homeless, there's so many more people that are exactly in your shoes, right? So it's interesting. So I came from Portland, right? And it's one of those things that I don't like to say very often in Bend because all the problems in Portland wasn't happening when I was there. Kind of a joke. But they had a different philosophy. Their housing authority had a different philosophy. Their philosophy was to really target the 0 to 30% area median income population, right? And provide housing for them, right? The housing authority here took kind of a different view. And they were like, we need preventative measures, right? Not reactionary measures. And so they have quietly been pumping out housing like crazy. And in the past 6 years, I think we have added maybe 700 units of housing. And they're planning, they have 3 approved projects for this next 12 months. And they're just planning on continuing to do that, continuing to do that, continuing to do that, for that very reason. Now, most of that housing is for people that are making less than 60% of the area median income. And so, like you said, there's a gap, right? This is what these conversations are about. There is a gap for people that are like 80% lower, and actually in our area, maybe even like 120.
Yeah. 220.
Yeah, and lower. That's a serious gap that we need to try to figure out how to solve, because the federal government really isn't targeting that. That there's not very many grants or loans that a housing authority can go after to build properties for that gap. It's more for 60% and under. And you want to talk about your gap?
Can you monetize for us at all, what that gap would be? Like how little someone would be making. I know we have that sheet here. And does that explain the whole thing?
Probably not, but we can give it a shot.
Okay.
So what this shows is you've got the 60% of the AMI at the bottom.
Yeah.
So that is where affordable housing. So
I
if
see.
somebody is making $53,951, they're making too much. So affordable housing is that 60% of AMI or below. And then purchase opportunities for folks for affordable housing habitat, things like that, are 80% of AMI.
What is AMI?
Area median income, excuse me.
The average income.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what you'll see in the city of Bend, when I think about the first house Chief and I bought, was 175. And when was the last time you saw a house for 175 in Bend? But folks that are making 60% of AMI can only afford a house for $195 and rent of $1,349, and that is not something that you can even find in town anymore. So you look here that your paralegals, your probation officers are making under 80%. And our median home price, this sheet is a little outdated. I think it was $785 last month. And so this is where we took that dip. I think it was in April that it was $660. So somebody who's making 150% of the area median income still can't afford a house because it's $500,000.
Yeah.
And that's their threshold, and that's not even our average.
And I think the important thing for a lot of folks that we're talking about is the black column, that's the rent. So if you're looking at a teacher that's making $74,000, which that's a pretty good salary, they can afford $2,200 for rent. So what happens to like the guy that's up on Bond Street with us that makes $21,000? He can't afford $2,200 a month. I always use the example of my 23-year-old daughter. She has a one-room studio apartment, which is $2,000 a month. She's a 23-year-old kid that is working 2 jobs and is just barely making it for one that's a duplex. And she doesn't eat a lot. I get her groceries. She comes home for meals. She comes does laundry. I give her some money for gas, but I am not very far up on this line here either, so I don't have a lot of extra for my own kiddo. And the only way I can do is because I bought a house 10 years ago that I don't have to pay $4,000 for. So I think it's a really challenging conversation, not only for the unhoused here that are the 0 to 30% of the income, but the working class that's, we're making good wages, and I haven't made it to food banks, but we're not that far away. Professionals in town are not that far away either from being priced out and not being able to find something if we lose it.
I think it's a really fun thing to add in there, the whole idea of telling a person that's living houseless that if they just got a job, take all that information you just heard. These are thinking people. They know all these bits of data. So saying just get a job, you'll get this all fixed. They know better. So, other questions?
For the properties that Epic is managing for housing work, are all of the residents in those properties have vouchers?
Yeah, no, they're not, yeah. So there is a misconception about affordable housing out there. Yeah, so there, I wish I would pull this information, but housing vouchers are very limited.
Oh, yeah.
In a housing voucher, you get this voucher that says you have to be under 50% of the AMI. So first of all, you have to be even less than 50. And then what you do is you pay 30% of your adjusted income. So there's some adjustment in there around, medical bills and stuff like that. But they're paying 30%, which is really, what a normal household should be paying for their housing so that they can afford food and medicine and, life. Yeah. So, so those folks are, I don't want to call them lucky, but that is almost like a golden ticket in affordable housing, right? The majority of folks are in what's called tax credit properties, and it's a IRS actually funded program where they give incentives and tax credits to builders and investors to bring down the costs of building a property, and then no subsidy in operations after it's built. There is a what's called a 15-year affordability test, so they have to be kind of rent controlled by the state for that 15 years, and that's how they get that tax credit. But it is based on the AMI, and that AMI for Bend, I think, was like 107,000. Anyway, there's a couple of different, yeah. So whenever you really look at that and you base 30% off of that for the ceiling of those affordable properties, it's creeping up there too. Even for the affordable properties, it's getting expensive.
So what would be the rent, say, for a one bedroom in the properties that you?
Yeah, that and so in our properties we have a lot of different what they call set asides. So we help people at 60, 50, 40% of the AMI, sometimes even 30. So if you get in with a 30% AMI, it could be $300, right? If you are in a 60%, you're looking at maybe $1,200 for a 2-bedroom.
What is average rent in Bend in general?
I actually don't have that.
Well, I know what,
Speak in general.
I know what, Housing Works provides, or, what the market rent is in each of the different kinds of housing. And so right now, a 1-bedroom is $1,300, let's say that's market. But your daughter's not in that situation. And a 3-bedroom is $2,300. Oh, and
Yeah.
I don't know where people find those kind of rents.
They don't.
So
Well,
I don't
and
understand where those, this year's market rent comes from.
And I'm not sure if you're talking about market rent or what's called a payment standard that they base the vouchers on, and those are based on HUD figures that tell us what our market is, and they're usually not based in reality. They're usually based 3 years behind, and it takes them 3 years to kind of catch up with
That's
reality.
what it is.
Yeah. The other thing is supply and demand. So there are people that have vouchers right now that cannot find a place to live. They have a voucher that is guaranteed that the government is going to pay a good portion of their rent, and they can't use it because there just isn't enough supply of units out there.
I think that's just a quick, great segue. Even if everybody made enough money, right now, we do not have enough housing just across the spectrum. We're in a deficit. There's not enough market rate housing. And so it goes all the way down to those shelter beds. On my many pieces of paper, I brought just another illustration that if anybody is interested, but just across the spectrum, we are down for affordable rental housing, home ownership, and market home. I mean, it's just, it may seem like construction is happening all the time, but we are behind.
Just a follow, this was very helpful, by the way. But looking at the first column on the back, you can see emergency shelters showing need, I guess, which is a little short of the.
Yes, these are
actual
2020, based on the housing analysis, and so I went ahead and, which is why the whole thing is all messed up, is I changed until 5/29.
So that my question is, we've been following the press, we know that the Martin v. Boise case established a standard for municipalities that they must provide to shelter to people that are asked to move or not camp overnight. So there's an obvious gap here.
Yes.
And it's seems to me a huge burden for cities and towns to meet that standard when it's a moving target, right? So do you have any sense of
Right now,
where
our
that's gonna
legal
go?
team is like somewhere out in the universe going, Amy, don't talk. But I'm gonna talk. So, it's a right back there watching you. What I will say with Martin v. Boise is that it's not a number match to match. And what it is, or what I can tell you today, is that there is some vacancies in our shelters. And so whether those are the right vacancies, our low barrier shelter is over capacity with the smoke. The Second Street, it's the Navigation Center. They've capped it at 100 people per night. They're going up to 130 because of the smoke. Last night they were at 107. So that is the only place in the city of Bend that if you left Tunnel today, that you could walk up and say, I need a place to sleep. And they would provide you with a bed and with meals and with support. All of the other shelters, even those that are low barrier, have a way that you have to get in. And so there are barriers for those folks. The big gap from my standpoint across the board is that first step, that emergency shelter bed. So Martin v. Boise, we have beds to offer people. They might not be the right beds and they might not be a real choice.
Thanks.
So.
Yes.
If you don't mind my asking another question. What is, oh, I blanked on it. I'm gonna have to wait until it comes back. I'm sorry, I do that sometimes. Oh.
Any other questions?
Could you go back on explaining what happens when people who have not been in housing for a long time are in housing and how you're supporting that and what are the needs for that?
That's a wonderful question. So when a person goes into houselessness, they're thrusted into a downward spiral. And that spiral is pretty steep and it's pretty fast. And when a household maybe gets evicted, that blemish on their record becomes a barrier for them to ever get housed again, right? And it may have just been because they couldn't pay their rent, right? And that makes sense, right? There's people out there working 2 to 3 jobs and still can't make their rent, pay their food and their medicine. So a person starts down that spiral, and the longer that they are in that spiral, the further down they go, and the more risk they are at, having things, when you are in scarcity, this is the best way that I can explain it, the way I think of it. So I need a diet, and I go off and on diets quite a bit, right? And when I'm on a diet, all I can think about is food. I want food, I want food, I want food. It's hard to focus on anything else. When people are unhoused, they have a huge scarcity, and all that they can do is survive. And so whenever we say, oh, you need to just get a job, or, oh, it's really easy for us to point those fingers, and it's really hard for them to get the help they need to be able to find housing. Now let's say they do, and let's say they've been houseless for a long time. So that takes a toll on people, on their mental health, and a lot of times maybe they had an undiagnosed mental illness that thrusted them down even further. And so going into housing is really bizarre. It's almost like a different culture. So I have had a lot of people that have come into housing and they finally have gotten in, and it becomes really lonely for them. It becomes isolating for them because their culture was surrounded by, you know, these other people experiencing the same things, and they're trying to help each other out, and so they get isolated from those people. And I have to say that part of my job is isolating them from those people, right? Because I have to provide a stable environment for them to be able to live in, to stabilize. And the biggest risk when people come in is not the actions they do, it's the actions their guests do. And whenever you're houseless, you make friends that sometimes aren't really your friends, and then you feel like you owe them, and all of a sudden they're coming into your community and causing problems. And then the other thing that is really important is that we have stabilized communities. And so that whenever someone comes out of houselessness, they're going into a stabilized community with people like them that have gone through it and help them stabilize. It's a wonderful and beautiful thing. But we have to have stabilized communities, and therefore we have to, you know, establish rules and make sure they're following them. I also know that the people have blemishes. You know, I don't know how much time we have. I have lots of stories, but one of the most heartbreaking stories I can think of is came across my desk while I've been here in Bend, where a person that is applying finally got to the top of the waiting list. Try to move them in. They have a blemish on their record, so we have a third-party company that tells us whether or not we're going to accept them or we're going to deny them built on criteria. This person was denied for some criminal offenses, and so we denied them. And there's a process that they can appeal it, and they get help from like Thrive and Neighbor Impact, a lot of wonderful agencies out there that come alongside them and help them through the paperwork to figure out mitigating circumstances so that I can say, you know what, you have done things to change your the risk of you doing that thing again in our housing, and so I'm gonna, you know, overturn that denial, and you're gonna come in, and you're gonna have Neighbor Impact or Thrive or other wonderful organizations be there along with you. Well, in the paperwork that was submitted, the story is this young mother of 3 got evicted in the winter, had no place to go, was homeless, was too proud to go to a shelter, and she didn't know what to do. Wandering around, and she saw an empty commercial building. She broke in because she was afraid that her kids would die. Well, the property manager showed up, caught her. She was arrested for breaking in, entering, felony charges, and that kept her out of other housing for a long time until she was able to tell the story and we were able to get her moved in. But that is happening, you know, in a lot of people's lives, that they, you know, that those barriers that shouldn't be there are there, and it keeps them out of housing. Do you have other experiences as you work with property managers or finding them permanent supportive housing?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add is like the culture that develops when people are unhoused is that of survival. And I think those of us that haven't had any type of scarcity, food, shelter, safety from physical violence, we don't really get it. But working with the folks that I've been working with, there is this guard that's around them, and you know they're coming in our situation into a shelter. They get their own shelter, but they're carrying with them that guard, that big heavy guard around them, and it's heavy. It's very heavy for them. And being able to say, I just had this conversation this morning with one of the gals, like, you know, you're here and you're safe, and you know today you don't have to go out trying to find propane so you don't freeze to death at night. You don't have to go out and try to find water and haul it back to you and your pet, and you know, just trying to, again, reiterating, like, you're safe here. Like, no one's gonna come in, steal your stuff. No one's gonna come, she's been assaulted many times. No one's gonna come in, hurt you. Like, you're safe here. And they don't hard for them to let that guard come down. And if you can think about someone carrying that around with them every day on the streets, it's an incredible burden just to have that mental load. Not to mention the load of, you know, getting propane, water, you know, finding a decent place to go to the bathroom. Like, it is super hard. But they're in those cycles for a long time, and so they don't trust it when they come to us. And it is a shifting culture. So I think what our program is doing is saying, you're here and you're safe now. You know, let this guard come down a little bit, and you know, starting that slower shift. I think some people go from the streets to an apartment, and there is a high rate of failure there because you know, you have support systems, but in other places they don't have support systems. So they go from the street or the woods into the apartment. They've got all this help getting them in there, and then the help is, oh, gone. You're in, you're safe, you're fine. Well, it's that community that helped them get there that, you know, which is nice about some of your programs, that it continues to be there and have support for people as they shift out of that scarcity, emergency, scared situation to where this is dependable, it feels good. I think anyone that has had PTSD, that can range across any wage or anything, but PTSD can get you anytime. And it, knowing that you're safe and having that consistency and people there, like, it's okay to be triggered, it's okay to have that that normal feeling doesn't feel normal. So it's, again, giving these folks the time to say, you've been experiencing this type of chaos that's up here, and this feels normal, and then you bring it down to quiet, normal, predictable, and they don't know what to do with it because they haven't lived in it in a long time. So it's, again, saying this quiet, predictable thing is the good thing. You know, even though that you're used to this crazy, you know, doing something, that's what you're used to, so that feels normal to you, but this other thing, this quiet, predictable thing, is the thing that is healthy for you, and it takes time. So, you know, getting a contract with the city where we have time, our program is not, you know, you're in and out in 4 weeks or a night. We have time for these folks in our program to settle into that calm and start making those cultural shifts. So it is really hard for them to shift out, and it's not because they don't want to. It's just it's such a lived chaos for so long. It just feels normal.
Revisiting the topic of safe parking, Pastor Chris Kramer at Nativity Lutheran Church says that the fact that people can come in there and be there for a good bit of time and have a lot of support, that the rate of people who have been able to graduate into permanent housing has been astounding to them. It's been very, very encouraging. And so, as you were saying, yes, there is a real correlation there between having the right kind of support, not only when they're parked, but also once they get into another place to be able to stay there and be successful with it. So that's another pitch for safe parking.
I think it's 84% across safe parking programs or transitions to permanent housing. I think it's 84.
And it's one of the fastest ways we can get people into transitional housing, because it's an RV in a parking lot. And a little bit of paperwork, but still.
A little bit of paperwork. I will also say that even on the low barrier shelter, again, the navigation center, they transitioned 231 people into more permanent housing in the last year that they've been in existence in that capacity since July, and 231. So I'm saying that with a lot of confidence. It might be 232, but no, we do track those metrics. We do have that information. We present it to the council on a regular basis to be good stewards of the funds that are coming through the city into these programs.
I remembered, and I wrote it down. Okay. Is Ben building any truly affordable housing? With all the housing that you see going up, is any of it?
Yes, but
Is
it's
it?
it's so expensive to build in Bend. It is really about supply and demand and the fact that we don't have land that is affordable, and if you can't start, and what the city can surplus, what the county can surplus is very limited, but if you can't buy that land for a reasonable amount of money, then you can't build on these really thin margins to do affordable housing. So that's why partnerships like with Housing Works are so important. And the city did their affordable housing fund. It was the first, I believe, in the state in like 2006, but it's only $1 million, $1.3 million a year that we can leverage with our partners to create affordable housing. But it costs so much money to build here.
And I can share some good news. We are building our first permanent supported housing property in Bend. We have 33 units, and working with Shepherd's House as an operator. It is permanent housing. Each unit comes with a Section 8 voucher that will stay at that property. And we have not only found money to build this property, but we have found money through Central Oregon Fuse, going out and knocking on doors, to fund services there. And so there will be wraparound services to bring these folks in, and we will be targeting the folks that are chronically homeless, the folks that have been out there, kind of the longest, and might need intensive supports in order to become stabilized and successful. And it's the first one, I believe, in Central Oregon. So
Where is it being built?
it's going to be built, so some of you folks that have been around for a long time, anybody remember the old theater off of 3rd? Yeah.
Tri-Cinemas used to be able to walk to it.
Maybe people that like Irish food, Kelly D's. Yeah, it's so 3rd and Cleveland is kind of that neighborhood in Southeast.
Yeah, that's good news, like you said.
Yeah, it is. It's great news.
The question I had was the bigger picture, and you answered a little bit of that, but what needs to happen community-wise, city-wise, government-wise for this affordability gap to pull down, for things to, I don't know, be a little bit more affordable?
I don't have that
I know it's big.
That is a loaded question.
I know it's big.
And I don't have a good answer. The city can continue to surplus land where it is available to create opportunities to put affordable housing in place. Stillwater Crossing, which is down on 97, people may see it as you head out of town. That also is affordable. Those units are coming. I believe currently in the pipeline, there's 880 plus units of affordable housing on the horizon. But until the market changes, and I just don't know how we can do more.
But you also talked about control rent, and so how's that?
What was that?
The control rent.
Control rents, yes, yeah. So first of all, I want to just acknowledge that this isn't a Central Oregon thing, right? It's happening all over our nation, and it is. So the federal government is trying to, throw money at it. Sometimes the wrong way, but they're trying to get the money out there, but it's happening everywhere, and so it's really competitive. Like I said, in Central Oregon, your local housing authority is working diligently behind the scenes, very quietly, getting more places built as fast. I bet they're building per capita more units than any other housing authority in the state. The other thing I just want to point out is, everybody's looking for the silver bullet for this answer. And I hate to say it, there isn't one, right? It's going to be a shotgun approach. There's lots of different, that's why we talk about the gaps. We have to figure out where the gaps are. But there's a continuum of housing that we need to provide to help folks. And we just have to learn how to manage this problem and work together with the city, with the electeds, with our churches, with the Homeless Leadership Coalition is working hard to figure this out, with just bringing people together in having conversations. This is huge, getting the information out there so that we're all kind of in it together and understanding the problem is part of the solution, right? You're all part of the solution right now.
I'm just wondering, do you work along with behavioral health people at all?
I sure do. I meet with Deschutes County Behavioral Health every month. And we have partnered with them in multiple properties. We have set aside units for them so that they can bring people in, and they're a great partner, absolutely. We also partner with Best Care, Neighbor Impact, Pfeiffer and Associates, Thrive, DHS. And I was talking about Bridge Meadows. This is a really good, feel-good story. It is intergenerational housing for foster care. And so we built a campus where there's elders that live on the property, and then there's people that are in the foster care system on the property as well. And they have intergenerational time where the elders are helping them with their homework and teaching them how to cook and sew, and it's amazing, it's cool. And those are the types of programs that are really important in our community, and they're feel good, right? That feels good, and I think that that could be addictive for a community to provide things like that see success and feels good, right?
Is it true, and I'm not sure, I heard this from somebody who actually works with homeless people, that there are homeless people that do not want housing?
Yes. I think that's, yes, there are people that if you go today and say, do you want to go into housing, the answer might be no. I also think that that's an easy way out for folks in the community that are not facing those challenges. Presenting people with an option to go into shelter when it's not an option that they feel like they can commit to, or telling them they have to go into shelter when they have to give up the pet that is the one thing that has been their companion through what has been a horrible experience, or that they might lose a child, or they can't go with their partner. Until we have multiple settings of low barrier shelter that really meets people where they're at and gives them what they need, presenting them with a choice that doesn't match what they say they need isn't really a choice. And I will also say a shout out to behavioral health. They also go into navigation. They reach into the other shelters as well. There's an embedded behavioral health person that is at the Lover shelter that the city actually pays for. The city and the county, regardless of some of the stuff that's out on the news, work very closely to support the community as a whole. So they do an amazing job.
I would answer your question with kind of my answer for a lot of things. And that's the 90-10 rule. Have you ever heard the 90-10 rule? Where 10% of the population causes 90% of the problems, right? It's the same. I mean, that's has nothing to do with where your income level is. It's just society, right? And it's the same thing with houselessness. Everybody has that face of houselessness, and it's that 10%. It's not the 90%. The 90% is quiet, and they're working really hard behind the scenes to be able to try to figure out a way out. You don't hear from them because they're there, but it's the 10% that gets all the press. They're the ones that are visible. They're the ones that are scary. They're the ones that maybe don't want to be housed, and they're the ones that also prey on the other 90%, because that happens.
I'm gonna concur with that. I use that 10% rule all the time with the folks, again, 15 years at Family Kitchen. I use it all the time because folks will say, well, aren't they taking advantage of the free food? And I'm like, okay, so I can look around the room and maybe 10 out of the 100 are taking advantage. Do you want me to not give food to the other 90? So no, it is flat out absolutely the thing to look at. And even of the 10%, some of them are whip smart, and they've looked to the end of this thing again with the, yeah, I could go get a job and then I'd be in an apartment that I would have to be paying 70% of the income I'm getting to stay there. So there's been some thought process in some cases as well. Other,
I just want to add on to that. You know, we do street outreach, Central Oregon Villages, mostly by Chuck there in the back. So we identify folks, you know, that are on the streets that we thought would be great matches for our program. And there's one lady in particular that I was talking to, and we thought she'd be great. She's an older gal in a trailer, and she kept saying no. Many times she'd say no. She didn't think that would be a good fit for her. And one day I was just like, "What? You know, tell me why. You know, I'm just curious why you wouldn't want to move into this village." And she's like, "Well, this trailer, you know, it looks like crap." Or she said, "It looks like crap, but this is the last place I lived with my husband, and I've lost him now, and this is the memories that I have with him in here, and this is where I feel safe. I haven't felt safe in many places, but for many years this has sheltered me, and I don't want to leave it." And I think it's not just about people doing drugs or alcoholics or, you know, a mental health issue that you know, sets them so far outside, but it's grief and it's loss, and a lot of times it's loss of a very close person that puts someone into the spiral that ends up as homelessness. So I think just it's not that it's just no. People won't do it, but it's not always for the reasons that we think. That they have found some tiny little bit of security and safety in what they have, even though to us it looks like garbage. But to them, it's a home, and to them, they have the memories of their loved ones, and they have some sense of freedoms that they don't have someone telling them what to do. I hated renting when I was a renter. You know, I can't paint my walls, I can't hang up anything, I have to listen to my neighbors fighting, I have to listen to their music. So I can, you know, being told, you're homeless, you have to move, and the place that you get to go is Second Street Shelter. You have no option other than that, and it's not a fit for a lot of people. We did have a gal that was at Second Street. She's an older gal in her 70s, emphysema, on oxygen, congestional heart failure, and she was at Second Street. And you know, she came to us and she's like, "I just needed a place where it was quieter, where I had a little bit of my own space, and I didn't have to be around people smoking." I mean, she has emphysema, so it's not a good choice, but it was the only choice for her. So she went so she'd have a roof over her head, but she was someone that is on oxygen and emphysema, and her own oxygen is to be around people that were smoking. And so again, it's not always just, nope, I don't want to do it. Like, it's not a good fit for me. Like, that doesn't work. So I think it's a broader no than just, nope, I don't want to be housed.
So I had a question kind of getting back to some of the numbers, and you mentioned elected officials.